I stared at my sister Isabella across the dinner table at Romano's, the same restaurant where we'd celebrated every family milestone for the past 15 years. Her engagement ring caught the candlelight as she gestured dramatically, discussing wedding plans with our parents. The ring was beautiful, a 2-carat princess cut that probably cost more than most people's cars. What she didn't know was that I'd quietly paid for it through my investment in her fiancé's struggling marketing firm. The Oceanview Grand Resort, Isabella announced proudly, showing everyone photos on her phone. 300 guests, beachfront ceremony, 5-course reception dinner. It's going to be absolutely perfect. Mom clasped her hands together. Oh, Isabella, it looks like something from a magazine. Dad nodded approvingly. Now that's how you celebrate a wedding. Nothing but the best for our Isabella. I took a sip of my water, staying quiet as usual. At 28, I'd learned that family dinners were easier when I let Isabella have the spotlight. She was the golden child, Stanford MBA, engagement to a successful entrepreneur, everything planned to perfection. I was just Sophia, the quiet one who worked somewhere in tech and lived modestly in a small apartment downtown. The venue alone is costing us $40,000, Isabella continued, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she wanted to impress people. But Marcus insisted we spare no expense. He says this is our one chance to show everyone what we've built together. 40,000? Mom gasped. That's incredible, sweetheart. Isabella's eyes found mine across the table. Of course, we had to be selective about the guest list. The venue has limited space and well. She paused dramatically. We wanted to make sure everyone there could really appreciate what we're creating. I knew what was coming. Isabella had perfected this particular dance over the years. The subtle put-downs disguised as concern, the way she'd position herself as the successful sister while making me feel small. Usually I just took it. Tonight felt different somehow. Sophia, I've been meaning to talk to you about the wedding, Isabella said, her voice taking on that fake sweet tone that meant trouble. I know money's been tight for you lately. Has it? I asked quietly, genuinely curious where this was going. Well, yes. I mean, look at you. You're 28 and still renting that tiny apartment. You drive that old Honda. You never travel anywhere exotic or post about fancy restaurants. She gestured around Romano's. Even tonight, you ordered the cheapest thing on the menu. I had ordered the Caesar salad, but only because I wasn't particularly hungry. The truth was, I could have bought Romano's without checking my bank balance, but explaining that would require conversations I wasn't ready to have. The bridesmaid dresses are $800 each, Isabella continued. I picked them from Vera Wang's new collection. They're absolutely stunning, but I know that's probably challenging for your budget. Mom looked uncomfortable. Isabella, maybe we could. No, it's fine. Isabella waved her hand dismissively. I've been thinking about this a lot, actually. Sophia, maybe it would be better if you just attended as a regular guest instead of being in the wedding party. That way you wouldn't have to worry about the dress, the bachelorette party expenses, the bridal shower contributions, all those costs that add up. The table fell silent. Dad cleared his throat awkwardly while Mom stared at her plate. Isabella's fiancé Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. You know what? Isabella's voice brightened as if she'd just had a brilliant idea. Maybe you could even skip the wedding altogether. I mean, I know you're not really comfortable at fancy events anyway. You could save the money you'd spend on a gift and a dress and maybe treat yourself to something nice instead. You can't even afford a bridesmaid dress, she laughed, the sound sharp in the quiet restaurant. Maybe just skip the wedding. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. Isabella had always been beautiful, but there was something cold in her eyes tonight that I'd never noticed before. Or maybe I'd been choosing not to see it. I understand, I said quietly, setting down my fork. If that's what you think is best. Isabella's smile was radiant. Oh, Sophia, I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this. I was worried you might take it the wrong way, but this is really better for everyone. You won't have to stress about money and I won't have to worry about, well, you know. I didn't know actually, but I was beginning to understand that my sister had constructed an entire narrative about my life that had very little to do with reality. The wedding is going to be perfect, Isabella continued, turning back to our parents. 2 weeks from Saturday. The ceremony starts at sunset, 5:30 exactly. The photographers want to capture that golden hour lighting. Then cocktails on the terrace, dinner in the main ballroom and dancing until midnight. She pulled out her phone again, scrolling through what looked like hundreds of wedding photos. The flowers alone are costing $12,000. Peonies and garden roses, all white and blush pink. The cake is 4 tiers with hand-piped sugar flowers. And the entertainment. She practically glowed. We hired the same string quartet that played at the governor's daughter's wedding last year. Marcus finally spoke up. The whole weekend is going to be incredible. We've reserved a block of rooms for out-of-town guests, and there's a welcome party Friday night, then a farewell brunch Sunday morning. How many people are coming? Dad asked. 300 for the ceremony and reception, Isabella replied. It's going to be the event of the season. Everyone who matters will be there. The implication hung in the air. I wasn't everyone who mattered. My phone buzzed on the table. The caller ID showed Oceanview Grand Resort. Perfect timing as always. Sorry, I should take this, I said, reaching for my phone. Isabella rolled her eyes. Sophia, we're having family dinner. Can't your work wait? It'll just be a second, I assured her, swiping to answer. Hello, this is Sophia. Ms. Martinez. I'm so glad I caught you. The voice belonged to Jennifer Walsh, the resort's event coordinator. I'd worked with her on several events over the past 2 years. I wanted to personally confirm the final payment for the Henderson-Morrison wedding on the 23rd. Everything is set exactly as you requested. The table had gone quiet. Isabella was staring at me with confusion, probably wondering why someone from her wedding venue was calling me. Yes, that's perfect, Jennifer, I said, keeping my voice level. The full payment went through this morning? Absolutely. $47,000 for the ceremony and reception, plus the additional services you added, the upgraded floral arrangements, the premium bar package, and the spa services for the bridal party. Your total investment in this wedding is just over $63,000. I could feel 4 pairs of eyes boring into me. Isabella's face had gone very pale. And the accommodation block is confirmed as well? I continued. Yes, 25 rooms for the weekend, all charged to your master account. Ms. Martinez, I have to say this is going to be one of our most beautiful weddings this season. The Henderson family is so fortunate to have such a generous benefactor. Isabella's mouth was hanging open. Marcus looked like he'd seen a ghost. Mom and Dad were staring at me with expressions I couldn't quite read. Thank you, Jennifer. I'll see you next Friday for the final walkthrough. Actually, Ms. Martinez, there's one more thing. The bride requested some changes to the seating arrangements. She wanted to remove someone named Sophia Martinez from the guest list entirely. I told her I'd need to check with you first since you're the account holder. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Isabella hadn't just uninvited me from being a bridesmaid. She tried to have me banned from the wedding entirely. I see, I said carefully. And what did you tell her? I explained that any changes to the guest list would need your approval, since you're hosting the event. She seemed confused by that information. Isabella was frantically shaking her head at me, her eyes wide with panic. Marcus had his head in his hands. Jennifer, could you hold on just one moment? I looked directly at Isabella. My sister seems to have some concerns about my attendance at her wedding. Perhaps I should clarify a few things with her first. Of course, Ms. Martinez. Take your time. I put the phone on speaker and set it on the table. Isabella, I said quietly, Jennifer tells me you tried to remove me from the guest list entirely. Not just from the wedding party but from the wedding altogether. Sophia, I can explain. Yes, Ms. Martinez owns the entire resort. Jennifer's voice filled the sudden silence as she spoke to someone in the background. She's been our largest private client for the past 2 years. Their forks dropped when they realized what they'd just heard. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Isabella's face had gone from pale to gray. Marcus was staring at me like I'd just grown a second head. Mom and Dad looked completely bewildered. Jennifer, I said into the phone, could you please explain to my family exactly what the Oceanview Grand Resort is? Certainly. The Oceanview Grand is a luxury resort and event venue owned by Martinez Hospitality Group. We have 47 rooms, 3 restaurants, a full-service spa, and some of the most beautiful event spaces on the coast. Ms. Martinez has owned the property for 3 years now, and she's transformed it into one of the premier wedding destinations in the state. Isabella made a small choking sound. And the Henderson Morrison wedding? I prompted. It's going to be absolutely spectacular. Ms. Martinez personally selected every detail. The flowers, the menu, the music, even the linens. She's been planning this surprise for months. The bride has no idea that her sister owns the venue and is paying for everything. I watched Isabella's face crumble as the reality hit her. For months she'd been bragging about her expensive, exclusive wedding venue. She'd been using it as another way to highlight the difference between her success and my supposed failure. The irony was almost too perfect. The bride mentioned that this Sofia Martinez person couldn't even afford a bridesmaid dress. Jennifer continued, clearly confused. But that seems strange, since Ms. Martinez just purchased 3 additional Vera Wang dresses for the bridal party and told me to donate them to a local charity for brides in need. Mom gasped softly. Dad was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Jennifer, I think we need to have a conversation about the guest list, I said. Could you give me a few minutes with my family? Of course, Ms. Martinez. Should I hold off on any final confirmations until I hear from you? Yes, please. I'll call you back within the hour. I ended the call and looked around the table. The silence was deafening. Isabella was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. You own the resort? I own 12 properties across 3 states, I said simply. The Oceanview Grand is just one of them. But how? You live in that tiny apartment. You drive an old car. You work in tech support or something. I had to laugh at that. Isabella, I've never worked in tech support. I run Martinez Hospitality Group. We specialize in acquiring underperforming luxury properties and transforming them into premier destinations. Last year, our revenue was just over $87 million. Marcus found his voice. 87 million? Our net profit was 31 million, I clarified. The business has been growing steadily since I started it 5 years ago. Dad leaned forward. Sofia, why didn't you ever tell us? It was a fair question and one I'd been asking myself for years. Would it have mattered? Isabella has spent the last decade making it clear that I don't measure up to her standards. Tonight, she uninvited me from her wedding because I supposedly can't afford a dress. Last Christmas, she suggested I skip the family trip to Aspen because it would be too expensive for me. 2 years ago, she told her friends I was her struggling little sister, who needed help finding a real job. I looked directly at Isabella. You've never once asked me what I actually do for work. You've never asked about my life, my goals, my dreams. You decided I was a failure and you've been treating me like one ever since. Isabella's eyes were filling with tears. I didn't know. You didn't want to know, I corrected gently. There's a difference. Mom reached across the table toward me. Sweetheart, we had no idea. You always seemed so quiet about your work. We thought maybe you were embarrassed about it. I was quiet because every time I tried to share something, Isabella would change the subject or find a way to turn it into a comparison that made me look bad. It was easier to just disappear. The truth was more complicated than that, but it was as much as I was willing to share right now. The real reason I'd kept my success hidden was that I'd wanted to see if my family could love me without it. I'd wanted to know if Sofia the person was enough, or if they only valued Sofia the achievement. Tonight had given me my answer. The wedding. Isabella started, then stopped. Is paid for, I finished. Completely. The venue, the flowers, the food, the music, the photographer, the rooms for your guest. Everything you've been planning is exactly as you wanted it. But why? She whispered. After everything I said tonight, after how I've treated you, why would you do this? I thought about that for a moment. Because despite everything, you're still my sister. Because I remember the Isabella who used to read me bedtime stories when I was scared of thunderstorms. Because I hoped that maybe someday we could find our way back to being a real family. Isabella was crying openly now. Sofia, I'm so sorry. I don't even know how to begin to apologize for. Start with the guest list, I said firmly. Jennifer tells me you tried to have me removed entirely. Not just from the wedding party but from the wedding. She nodded miserably. I thought. I was embarrassed about you being there. I didn't want my friends to see you and think less of me for having a sister who wasn't successful. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Even knowing it was coming, hearing her say it out loud was brutal. Isabella. Mom gasped. I know how it sounds, Isabella said quickly. I know how awful that is. But I've been so focused on appearances, on making sure everyone sees me as successful and put together, that I lost sight of what actually matters. Marcus finally spoke up. Isabella, we need to talk about this. What you just said, that's not the person I fell in love with. Isabella turned to him, panic in her eyes. Marcus, please. I know I messed up, but... You tried to ban your own sister from your wedding because you were embarrassed by her, he said quietly. Except it turns out she's more successful than both of us combined, and she's been secretly paying for our entire wedding out of kindness. He looked at me with something that might have been respect. Sophia, I owe you an apology too. I went along with Isabella's assessment of you without ever bothering to get to know you myself. That was wrong. I appreciated his honesty, but I was more interested in what Isabella was going to do next. The question now, I said, is what happens next? Do you want to have this wedding, Isabella? Do you want to marry Marcus and start a life together based on honesty and respect? Or do you want to keep playing this game where your worth is determined by how much better you are than everyone else? Isabella wiped her eyes with her napkin. I want the wedding. I want to marry Marcus. But I want you there, Sophia. Not just as a guest but as my sister. As my maid of honor, if you'll still consider it. I'll consider it, I said carefully. But things need to change between us. Real change, not just wedding day promises that get forgotten a month later. What do you mean? I mean, we need to have real conversations about our lives. I mean, you need to stop making assumptions about me and start asking questions. I mean, we need to figure out how to be sisters again, not competitors. Isabella nodded eagerly. Yes, I want that. I really do. And I want to understand how we got here, I continued. How did you become someone who was embarrassed by her own sister? How did I become someone who felt like she had to hide her entire life from her family? Dad cleared his throat. Maybe that's something we all need to think about. As a family. Mom was still staring at me with wonder. Sweetheart, I'm so proud of what you've accomplished. But I'm sorry you felt like you couldn't share it with us. I'm sorry too, I said honestly. I could have tried harder to break through the patterns we'd fallen into. I could have been more direct about what was happening. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Ms. Martinez, just checking in about the guest list discussion. Should I maintain the current arrangements? I showed the text to Isabella. So what's it going to be? Am I invited to this wedding or not? Isabella looked at the message, then at me. You're not just invited. You're the guest of honor. You're the reason any of this is possible. She paused, seeming to gather her courage. Sophia, would you consider being my maid of honor? I know I don't deserve it after tonight, but I can't imagine getting married without my sister standing next to me. I looked around the table at my family. Dad was nodding encouragingly. Mom had tears in her eyes. Marcus was watching Isabella with an expression that suggested he was seeing her differently than he had an hour ago. I'll be your maid of honor, I said finally. But I'm not wearing the Vera Wang dress. Isabella's face fell. Oh. Of course, if you don't like it. I'm wearing the dress I already bought, I continued. It's a custom piece from a designer friend of mine in New York. It cost considerably more than $800 and I think you'll like it. Relief flooded Isabella's face. You already bought a maid of honor dress? I bought it 3 months ago, I admitted. Right after you got engaged. I was hoping you'd ask me to be in your wedding, even though you'd been dropping hints that you weren't sure I'd fit in with your other bridesmaids. 3 months ago, Isabella repeated slowly. Before you even knew if I'd ask you. I knew you'd ask eventually, I said. I just wasn't sure if you'd mean it. Isabella reached across the table and took my hand. I mean it now. I mean it more than I've ever meant anything. I squeezed her hand. Then we'd better call Jennifer back and get this wedding finalized. 2 weeks isn't very long to plan the rest of the details. Actually, Isabella said hesitantly, there is one more thing. The other bridesmaids. They're mostly my sorority friends and some colleagues. I don't think they know much about hospitality or event planning. Would you mind helping me make sure everything goes smoothly? I had to smile at that. Isabella, I've been making sure everything goes smoothly for the past 6 months. Every detail you've been worried about, every vendor you've been coordinating with, every backup plan you thought you needed, it's all handled. What do you mean? I mean, Jennifer and I have been in contact since the day you booked the venue. I know about the string quartet, the upgraded floral arrangements, the special dietary accommodations for Uncle Robert, the transportation for elderly relatives, the backup generator in case of power outages, and the indoor ceremony space in case it rains. Isabella stared at me. "You've been planning my wedding?" "I've been making sure your wedding would be perfect," I corrected. "You've been doing the planning. I've just been ensuring that your plans actually happen." Marcus laughed, but it wasn't unkind. So when Isabella was stressing about whether the caterer would remember her gluten-free requirements, I'd already provided them with a detailed list of all dietary restrictions and confirmed the backup menu options, I finished. And when she was worried about parking for 300 guests, I arranged for valet service and additional parking at the property next door. Isabella looked overwhelmed. "Why would you do all of that?" "Because I love you," I said simply. "Even when you drive me crazy, even when you hurt my feelings, even when you try to uninvite me from your own wedding. You're my sister and I wanted your day to be perfect." The tears were flowing freely now. "I don't deserve this. I don't deserve you." "Lucky for you, love isn't about deserving," I said. "It's about choosing to care about someone even when they make it difficult." Dad cleared his throat. "I think we owe you more than an apology, Sophia. We owe you our gratitude and our respect. And maybe we owe you some time to get to know the person you've become." "I'd like that," I said honestly. Mom reached for my other hand. "Could you tell us about your business? I mean, really tell us. I want to understand what you've built." I looked around the table at my family, really looked at them. For the first time in years, I saw curiosity instead of judgment in their eyes. I saw people who wanted to know me, not people who had already decided who I was. "Martinez Hospitality Group started as an accident," I began. "I was working as a project manager for a consulting firm, and one of our clients was a struggling boutique hotel in Napa Valley. The owners were going to lose everything and I couldn't stand watching it happen. I told them about my first property acquisition, about learning the hospitality business from the ground up, about the late nights and early mornings and the thousand small decisions that went into transforming a failing business into a thriving one. I told them about my team, Jennifer and the other coordinators who made magic happen every day, the chefs who created memorable experiences, the housekeeping staff who made sure every guest felt welcomed and valued. I told them about my vision for hospitality as a force for good, creating jobs, supporting local communities, providing spaces where people could celebrate life's most important moments. By the time I finished talking, our dinner had grown cold and the restaurant was nearly empty. But my family was still listening, still asking questions, still trying to understand the life I'd built while they weren't looking. $63,000. Isabella said quietly as we finally prepared to leave. "You spent $63,000 on my wedding." "I invested $63,000 in my sister's happiness," I corrected. "There's a difference." Isabella hugged me, then really hugged me for the first time in years. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making this up to you." "You don't need to make it up to me," I said. "You just need to be my sister. The real version, not the one who's trying to impress everyone." "Deal," she whispered. As we walked to our cars, Marcus fell into step beside me. "Sophia, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "When you were sitting there listening to Isabella talk about how you couldn't afford things, how you weren't successful enough for her wedding, what were you thinking?" I considered the question. Honestly, I was thinking about how sad it was that my sister had forgotten who I really am. And I was wondering if it was too late for us to remember how to be a family. And now, I looked back at Isabella, who was walking arm in arm with our parents, talking animatedly about wedding plans and asking Mom about her own wedding dress from 30 years ago. Now I think maybe it's not too late after all. 2 weeks later, I stood beside my sister as she married the man she loved in a venue I owned, wearing a dress that cost more than her car, surrounded by 300 guests who had no idea that the quiet maid of honor was the reason their evening was possible. Isabella was radiant, Marcus was happy, and our parents spent the entire reception telling anyone who would listen about their daughter's incredible business success. But the best part of the evening was the moment during the father-daughter dance when Isabella caught my eye across the room and mouthed "thank you," with tears streaming down her face. Not for the money, not for the venue, not for the perfect wedding I'd helped create. For giving her the chance to remember how to be my sister again. Some investments, I'd learned, paid dividends that couldn't be measured in dollars. And sometimes the best surprises were the ones that reminded you who you really were and who you could choose to become.